Hello, everybody. You're reading with Jimmy. And this is Jimmy. We're reading The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. This is translated by Luigi Ricci. This is part 2. Hopefully you read part 1 with me of this wonderful classic. Let's begin. We're continuing with, this is chapter 3, actually, a continuation of what we left off in part 1. But let us return to France and examine whether she, see the pronoun she? It's calling France a she. She did any of these things, the things that he was talking about in part 1, which is, remember, he's writing this, Machiavelli is writing this to Lorenzo the Magnificent, trying to help him understand what it means to be a ruler, how to keep his kingdom safe, how to keep power. So he had nothing else to offer Lorenzo. He's not a wealthy guy, so he's offering him the benefit of his experience in studying great men. You'll remember that. If not, go back and read chapter 1, the first reading, part 1. This is part 2. So, I will speak not of Charles, but of Louis as the one whose proceedings can be better seen as he held possession in Italy for a long time. Don't forget he's in Italy. And Italy in those days had city-states, lots of wars, lots of battles, lots of armies battling each other for power. So he's picking Louis from France because he had possession of Italy for a longer time. And you will then see, you meaning Lorenzo, you will then see that he, Louis, part of the challenge of a translator or anybody writing in English or any other language is the use of pronouns. So when you use a she to represent a country, you got to be reading carefully. I know it gets mixed up, and certainly with some of the goofiness that revolved around pronouns, in the last several years, and you can tell when I'm reading this perhaps, but pronouns are very important in the English language because otherwise you'd have to use nouns all the time. Jimmy did this, Jimmy did that. So you use he did that. And sometimes people try to pick their pronouns. Like in this case, Machiavelli gave a feminine pronoun to the country of France. Well, that's interesting. A lot of guys call their cars she or boats she. In any case, you will then see, you, Lorenzo, will see that he, Louis, did the opposite of all those things which must be done to keep possession of a foreign state. In other words, he screwed up. King Louis was called into Italy by the ambition of the Venetians. So now we know how he got to Italy. Venetians were ambitious, and they invited Louis to come on in, come on down. Pardon me. Who wished by his coming to gain half of Lombardy. So by Louis coming and joining the Venetians, they wanted to get half of Lombardy. Remember, there's lots of city-states going on in here. So I want you to remember this chess analogy before I continue. If you haven't played chess, or if you have played chess, you know that every move you gain something and you lose something. And I think you should look it up. And if you don't play, learn how to play because it's a great game. It's a strategic game. So in chess, every move gains something and loses something. And these pieces have different ways they move. Bishops run on diagonals, pawns move straight. They can open up with, 2 squares instead of 1. Depends on the opening they want to follow. But every move, you gain and lose something. So the object of the game is to checkmate the king. And you checkmate the king by making moves on the board that gain you more than you lose. So if you move a piece, you can give your opponent an opening to attack you. So it's the same thing with these city-states that were around when Machiavelli was writing this book. If he was invited, King Louis was invited by the Venetians, they wanted to gain half of Lombardy. I, Niccolo Machiavelli, will not blame the king for coming, nor for the part he took, because wishing to plant his foot in Italy and not having friends in the country. On the contrary, the conduct of King Charles, that was the pre-Louis King of France, having caused all doors to be closed to him. Whatever King Charles did. Now, we can look in history, study history, and figure out what King Charles did, but that's not necessary to understanding the prince. Machiavelli's telling us that King Charles did something, so all doors were closed to him. Couldn't get into Italy. So he was forced to accept what friendships he could find, and his schemes would have speedily been successful if he had made no mistakes in other proceedings. The king, Louis, not Charles, having acquired Lombardy, immediately won back the reputation lost by Charles. Hey, everybody, King Louis here. Genoa yielded. The Florentines became his friends. The Marquis of Mantua, the Dukes of Ferrara and Bentivogli, the Lady of Forli. All these names are Italian names. Forgive my mispronunciations, because I'm not Italian. I'm, Jimmy. Rimini, I could have my wife, who is Italian, help me with the pronunciations. In fact, I asked her to do that, and then I changed my mind, because I'll never remember it. Camerino, Pompeo. But in other words, a lot of these people, all of a sudden, when Louis shows up in Lombardy, they're all his friends now, right? The inhabitants of Lucca, of Pisa, and of Siena all approached him, Louis, with offers of friendship. And why is that? Well, to the spoils go the conqueror, right? Oh, he's here. He's a powerful guy. Let's now remember, why is Machiavelli writing this? Because he has nothing to offer Lorenzo the Magnificent except his study of men. That's his best gift. So the Venetians might then have seen the effects of their temerity, how to gain a few cities in Lombardy, that they had made the king ruler over 2/3 of Italy. So in other words, they might have then seen the effects of what they've done, because now how to gain a few cities in Lombardy, they made the king, Louis, the ruler over 2/3 of Italy. Holy mackerel. Consider how little difficulty the king would have had in maintaining his reputation in Italy if he had observed the aforesaid rules. That was the rules in part 1 we read. And if you forgot what the rules were, you should have wrote them down. If you forgot to write them down, go back and reread them, or wait until the analysis. And kept a firm and sure hold over all those friends of his we just mentioned, who being many in number and weak and fearful, one of the church, they were fearful of the church, and another of the Venetians. So all those people that he mentioned earlier were fearful of the church, who was very powerful in Italy, and the Venetians. They were always obliged to hold fast to Louis, and by whose aid he could easily make sure of any who were still great. But he was hardly in Milan before he did exactly the opposite. He screwed up by giving aid to Pope Alexander, to occupy the Romagna. So Louis apparently did something not good. He gave the Pope permission to occupy this country. Now, in those days, the Pope actually had armies, right? They also had an army, and the Vatican battled with other city-states. I know it's hard to believe. Nor did Louis perceive that in taking this course and giving Pope Alexander aid to occupy this, that he weakened himself by casting off his friends and those who had fled to his protection. And he actually strengthened the church by adding further temporal powers to the spiritual power, which gives it such authority. You see, what Machiavelli is telling Lorenzo is that by letting the Pope occupy this country, he strengthened the church. He made all his new friends, right, had fled to his protection. He weakened himself because he gave protection to the church and gave them more power than their spiritual power. He gave them temporal power, land. And having made that first mistake, he was obliged to follow it up, whilst to put a stop to the ambition of Alexander and to prevent him from becoming ruler of Tuscany. So now that he gave him Rome now, Alexander, the Pope, wanted to now rule Tuscany. So he, Louis, was forced to come to Italy. Now you remember, perhaps, if not, go back and reread, that one of the things that Machiavelli was telling Lorenzo is that the way you hold on to power when you conquer a country is to put a colony there, to go there yourself, but there's pros and cons for these strategies. Go back and review. And not content with having increased the power of the church and lost his friends, he, Louis, now coveting the kingdom of Naples, coveting, you know what coveting means? I covet. I want it. I want it. You're coveting. He divided it with the king of Spain. So he wanted Naples. And now, well, let's just divide it with the king of Spain. And were he, Louis, alone with the arbiter of Italy, he now brought in a companion. So before he was the guy, but now he's bringing in the king of Spain. You see how complicated it's getting? Because why? He hasn't thought it through. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the rules of life that we learn from Machiavelli is to think things through. Don't just react. Don't covet. Don't think things through. Remember the chessboard analogy. For every move, you gain something and you lose something. And the object of the game is to get more things that you gain from your moves than you lose. There are situations in the world that go on each and every day between countries, between people, between companies. You see companies going bankrupt because they make the wrong marketing move. They make the wrong sales move. This is why The Prince is such an effective essay. It's an essay, but it's a long book, right? Because these rules that you're going to find, and you'll find them with these little arrows that are pointing to them to write them down, they have stood the test of time. When you don't know what you're doing, when you haven't thought things through, the result is inevitably nothing good can come of it. So here you got a guy, Louis, splitting. He wants Naples, so he divides it. He says, come on, King of Spain, let's divide it up. So instead of being the only guy, the only arbiter, the only guy that in Italy doing these things, he now brought in a companion. So that the ambitious of that province, people in the province of Naples who are ambitious, and remember, ambition is one of the things that drive people. People have ambition or they don't. But if you have ambition, you're a driven person, right? You've got ambition, which is not a bad thing all the time. So Machiavelli is saying the ambitious of that province who were dissatisfied with Louis might have someone else now to appeal to. If they don't like Louis, they could what? They could go to the king of Spain and say, hey, king, well, what about what's going on here? And so in other words, they're divided. They've now got somebody else to complain to. And where he, Louis, might have left in that kingdom a king tributary to himself. In other words, he could have appointed somebody, like Machiavelli told you in part one. He could have appointed somebody there to be his king tributary. In other words, pay tribute to this guy that I've appointed. He, Louis, dispossessed him in order to bring in another who's capable of driving him out, because now the king of Spain can drive Louis out. Oh, it reminds me of a line from Shakespeare. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. That's not exactly what's going on here, deception, but at the same time, it's a tangled mess. Let's continue. The desire to acquire possessions is a very natural and ordinary thing, isn't it? You want to possess a house, you want to possess things, find, whatever, fine art. You want to possess knowledge. The desire to acquire possessions is natural. And when those men do it, who can do so successfully, they are always praised and they're not blamed. But when they cannot do it, and yet they want to do so at all costs, they make a mistake deserving of great blame. Another quote from Robert Browning, a man's reach must exceed his grasp, else what's a heaven for? So that's a very famous line from a poem. We're going to start reading poetry on this website, I think. Think about this, a man's reach must exceed his grasp, else what's a heaven for? In other words, you should always have ambition and strive. But yet if you do, Freud teaches us that if you try to do things and keep trying to do things and keep failing, you become neurotic, right? So Machiavelli is saying it's natural to acquire possessions, and when you can do so successfully, you're praised and you're not blamed for anything. Oh, this is great, you did it. Sometimes look what's happening to famous executives when they get to be the CEO. People who hate them are now calling on them and saying, hello, how can I help you? But when they cannot do it and they want to at all costs, they sacrifice everything. They make a mistake deserving of great blame because they probably step on a lot of people. Let's continue. If France, therefore, with her own forces, could have taken Naples, she ought to have done so. If she could not have taken Naples, she ought not to have shared it, right? So why do you share something you can't take? And if the partition of Lombardy with the Venetians is to be excused as having been the means of allowing the French king to set foot in Italy, remember, they need a foothold. They can't just walk into the country. This other partition deserves blame. Not having the excuse of necessity. In other words, it wasn't necessary for him to split, right, Lombardy with the Venetians, but he did it. It wasn't necessary. He just did it. So Louis thus made 5 mistakes. This is important that you should write these down. He had crushed the smaller powers, crushed them. He increased the power in Italy of one potentate. And he brought into the land a very powerful foreigner, King of Spain. And he had not come to live there himself. He's just visiting. Nor had he established colonies. Now, these things here, and I'm going to highlight them for you, these things here were basically all talked about in the first part 1 reading. So go back and reread them. But those are the mistakes Louis made. And remember, he's telling this to Lorenzo the Magnificent. Still, these mistakes, if he had lived. This is called foreshadowing. So apparently Louis died, right? I don't know the history. I'm not going to tell you the history, even if I knew it. If he had lived, they might not have injured him had he not made the 6th mistake, that of taking the state from the Venetians. So he gave it to them, right? And he took it back. For if he had not strengthened the church, which he did here, and brought in the Spaniards into Italy, it would have been right and necessary to humble them, meaning the Venetians. Having once taken those measures, he had never have to have consented to their ruin. Because had the Venetians been strong, it would have kept the others from making attempts on Lombardy. You see how he figures out this chessboard. Isn't he amazing? Well, Jimmy, how does he know all this? Well, he studied human beings, and he studied this. That's what he's offering Lorenzo, are his observations and study of men of power, great men. Like Louis, King Charles. Partly because the Venetians would not have consented to any measures by which they did not get it for themselves. And partly because the others would not have wanted to take it from France to give it to Venice. and would not have the courage to attack both. You see how he's calculating here about the Venetians? Okay. If anyone urges that King Louis yielded Romano to Alexander and the kingdom of Naples to Spain in order to avoid war, if you think that he did that to avoid war, I reply, Machiavelli replies, with the reasons already given, that one ought never to allow a disorder to take place in order to avoid war. For war is not thereby avoided, but it's only deferred to your advantage. To your disadvantage. Repeat this. One ought never to allow a disorder to take place to avoid war, because war is not thereby avoided, but it's only deferred to your disadvantage. I can think of 3 situations going on in the world today where that's the truth. I'm just telling you. And if you don't believe me, start looking around. Start looking around and start thinking. And if others allege that the promise given by the king to the Pope to undertake that enterprise for him in return for the dissolution of his marriage and for the cardinalship of Rouen, I reply with what I shall say later on about the faith of princes and how it is to be observed. Remember, in these days, marriage was also a strategic move on the chessboard. People married other people to gain power. If you doubt that, go back and start reading history. We don't read history here. We understand that having an understanding of history enriches our reading of classical literature. This is a classical piece of literature. Why? Because it's language charged with meaning, like Ezra Pound says. Thus, King Louis lost Lombardy through not observing any of those conditions which have been observed by others who have taken provinces and wish to retain them. Nor is this any miracle, but very reasonable and natural. It's not a miracle that he lost Lombardy. It's natural. He didn't follow the rules. I spoke of this matter with Cardinal Rohan at Nantes when Valentine, as Caesar Borgia, son of Pope Alexander. Jimmy, what do you mean, son? I thought priests don't marry. Well, in these days, they not only married, they had kids, right? Pope Alexander was commonly called, was occupying Rome now, for on Cardinal Rohan saying to me, so you're talking about Machiavelli had dealings with these great men. He was dealing with these great men, conversing with them, studying them, interfacing with them. So saying to me that Italians did not understand war. I replied that the French didn't understand politics. For if they did, they would never allow the church to become so great. Isn't that interesting? Well, Jimmy, what do you mean the church? I have a deep faith. Well, of course you do, and that's good. I'm not challenging your faith. What I'm challenging is your thinking about these things. So what's so wrong about this statement here, if there's anything wrong? That Machiavelli is saying they would never have allowed the church to become so great. The church in these days was great. A lot of power. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an essay about the study of power. How you gain it, how you retain it, and how you lose it. Experience shows us that the greatness in Italy of the church and also of Spain have been caused by France. I want you to think about this. The greatness in Italy of the church and Spain was caused by France. Why? Because they didn't do anything to stop it. If you see something wrong and you don't say anything, you don't stop it, it just starts wiggling out of control, doesn't it? Doesn't it? If you see something happening that's wrong and you don't say anything, it just gets worse. That's what Machiavelli's saying here. isn't he? And her ruin was proceeded from them, from which may be drawn a general rule. Note the arrow, right? Which never or very rarely fails. Pay attention. Whoever is the cause of another becoming powerful is ruined himself. I can think of 8 examples in the world today where that rule is true. Whoever is the cause of another becoming powerful is ruined himself. For that power is produced by him, either through craft or force, and both of these are suspected by the one who has been raised to power. You raise someone to power, and you're ruined. Why? Because the person you raised to power starts looking back and saying, aha! They're the ones who did this, so I got to get rid of them. I better keep going, otherwise we'll be here all day. Chapter 4, why the kingdom of Darius, occupied by Alexander, did not rebel against the successors of the latter after his death. That subtitle of the chapter 4 by Machiavelli brings up a piece of history. We're going to do an extended example now, and he's bringing up Darius and Alexander the Great. Darius, the Persian king, and Alexander, the Macedonian conqueror. Now, if you don't know your history, that's okay, because you're going to read this and you're going to gain something. If you do know what Alexander did when he conquered Persia, you will be enriched. You will not only have a deep understanding of this chapter, you'll have appreciation. Considering the difficulties there are in holding a newly acquired state, some may wonder how it came to pass that Alexander the Great became the master of Asia in just a few years, and had hardly occupied it when he died, from which it might be supposed that the whole state would have rebelled. In that one sentence, he sums up what the whole chapter is going to be about. Alexander conquered Asia, ran it for a few years, died, and now some people may be wondering why the state didn't collapse or rebel once Alexander died, because he was a conqueror. There's some great movies made. Alexander the Great was made into a movie several times. Richard Burton probably played the best. It's a classic, Alexander the Great. However, his successors, Alexander's successors, maintained themselves in possession and had no further difficulties in doing so than those which arose among themselves from their own ambitions. Here we go again, ambition. I better write that down. That's very important. Ambition. His successors, Alexander's successors, maintained the possession, but they, except for their own ambition. I reply that the kingdoms known to history have been governed in 2 ways. Pay attention. Either by a prince and his servants, who, as ministers by his grace and permission, assist in governing the realm, or by a prince and by barons, who hold their positions not by favor of the ruler, but by antiquity of blood. So there's 2 ways that kingdoms have been governed, by a prince and servants to the prince, or a prince and barons. These servants owe their allegiance to the prince. The barons don't, because they have been rulers of their own little fiefdoms for antiquity. And such barons have states and subjects of their own, who recognize them as lords, right? They recognize the baron as their lord. And they're naturally attached to these barons. And in those states which are governed by a prince and his servants, the prince possesses more authority, right? Because there's no one in the state regarded as superior other than himself. And if others are obeyed, it's merely as ministers to the prince and officials of the prince, and no one regards them with any special affection. You see how he's painting this picture of the two types of ways you rule, right? The realm. Example of these two kinds of government in our own. When you see e.g., that's Jimmy ways of signaling you that Machiavelli is about to embark on examples. So pay attention. Example of these two kinds of government in our own time, his time. Can you think of any of these in our own time right now, whenever you're reading this? The beauty of the internet is I don't know when you're reading this. I know when I'm recording it. And I can, when you say a prince, well, first of all, remember, he's talking about monarchies, not republics, right? This is not America is a republic, but England has a queen and now a king, right? Think about these things. Examples of the two kinds of government in our own time are the Turk and the King of France. All of the Turkish monarchy is governed by one ruler. The others are his servants, and dividing his kingdom into sagnates. Right? He sends them into various administrators, changes, or recalls them at his pleasure. So he's the king. The Turkish king has his servants and his administrators, but they all circle back and come back to him. But the King of France is surrounded by a large number of ancient nobles, recognized as such by their subjects and loved by their subjects. And they have their prerogatives, of which the king cannot deprive them without danger to himself. In other words, he can't go into Baron A or B and say, I'm taking some of your land. He can't do it. Can't do it. Whoever now, here's an arrow, pay attention. Whoever now considers these two states will see that it would be difficult to acquire the state of the Turk. But having conquered the state of the Turk, it would be very easy to hold it. In many respects, on the other hand, it would be easier to conquer the kingdom of France, but there would be great difficulty in holding it. Do you know why? Can you guess why? Can you stop for a moment and analyze what Machiavelli just said? You can easily conquer the Turk, right? It would be difficult to acquire it, but it's not easy to conquer the Turk. But if you did, it's very easy to hold it. But the French, it's easier to conquer the France king, right? The king of France, but you can't hold it. Why? Too many barons that can challenge you, right? The causes of the difficulty of occupying the Turkish kingdom are, look at this man, look at this guy. Oh my gosh. That the invader could not be invited by the princes of that kingdom, because there are no princes, right? Nor hope to facilitate his enterprise by the rebellion of those near the ruler's person, as he will be evident from reasons given above. They're all servants to the king, right? To the Turk. Because being all slaves, right? They're servants to the king and dependent on the king, it will be more difficult to corrupt them. And even if they were corrupted, little effect could be hoped for. And they would not be able to carry the people with them for reasons mentioned. Why? Because this is a hierarchy. All the roads lead to the king of the Turkish king. He's got servants, people, everybody's leading up to the king. Therefore, whoever assaults the Turk must be prepared to meet his united forces and must rely more on his own strength than on the disorders of others. But having once conquered the Turk and beaten him in battle so that he could no longer raise armies, nothing else is to be feared except the family of the prince, the king of Turkey. And if this be extinguished, there will no longer be anyone to be feared, and others having no credit with the people, and the victor before the victory could be placed no hope in them, so he need not fear them afterwards. Well, Jimmy, that's pretty cruel, isn't it? I'm going to put a little arrow there. That's pretty cruel. Be extinguishing the family of the prince that you just conquered. Well, that's what you do when you conquer, right? In these days, or in any day, right? Don't you? You should. Well, Jimmy, that's just not right. Killing's not right. Of course it's not right. But that's what they do. This is a study of power. Pay attention. The contrary is the case in the kingdoms governed like that of France, because it is easy to enter them, the kingdoms of France. The kingdoms, what does he mean by, I thought there's only one kingdom, Jimmy. Of course there is, the king of France. But don't forget, France has barons, lots of barons with their own territories. So he gives it a plural kingdom. You see what I'm saying? Because it is easier to enter than winning over some baron of the kingdom. We can pick a baron and let's win that baron over, and just either through force or through cajoling, right? There being always malcontents. What does that mean? That means in a structure like this, where you have a lot of barons and a lot of territories, there's always a malcontent. What's a malcontent? Somebody who grumbles, who's not satisfied. And what does that mean? Well, he doesn't like the king of France, maybe. So he's a malcontent. And those desiring innovations, what does that mean? A new way of thinking. These can, for the reasons stated, open the way to you. Who's you? It's Lorenzo, right? He's writing to Lorenzo the Magnificent. And facilitate victory. But so he's really giving advice to Lorenzo on how to conquer these countries. You understand? Boy. I don't want to give away the ending, but keep in mind what I'm telling you. But Machiavelli's putting everything in writing. He's putting his thoughts on the line. He's offering advice. And you're going to say, well, why should Lorenzo the Magnificent take this advice? Well, Machiavelli hung around these great guys. He's observed them, he's documented them, and he's given them some really profound rules, as you'll see. But afterwards, if you wish to keep possession of a country like France or a baronet, infinite difficulties arise, both from those who have aided you and from those who you have oppressed. So in other words, even if you win, it's going to be difficult. Nor is it sufficient to suppress the family of the prince. For there remain those nobles who will take the lead in new revolutions, and being neither able to content them or exterminate them, you're going to face the state whenever you will lose the state, whenever an occasion arises. He's probably telling Lorenzo, don't even think about it. Now, if you will consider what the nature of the government of Darius, now he's back to the Darius Alexander example he started with, you will find it similar to the kingdom of the Turk. In other words, what? No barons, everything rolls up to the Persian king, Darius. And therefore, Alexander had first to overthrow it completely and invade the territory, after which victory, Darius being dead, the state remained secure to Alexander for the reasons discussed above. And his successors, Alexander's, had they remained united, might have enjoyed it in peace, nor did any tumults arise in the kingdom except those fomented by themselves. But it is impossible to possess with such ease countries constituted like France. So he's basically saying the Persian Empire, right? The Persian Empire was easy, like the Turk Empire is, but it's impossible to possess with ease countries like France. Hence arose the frequent rebellions of Spain, France, and Greece against the Romans. Remember the Romans, right? They conquered most of the known world, the Mediterranean Sea, everything around them, but Greece and France and Spain are all similar in the fact that they have barons, they have little fiefdoms, little city-states. Greece has Athens, Sparta, and all sorts of others, owing to the numerous principalities which existed in those states. For as long as memory of these lasted, The Romans were always uncertain of their conquest. But when the memory of these principalities had been extinguished, and with the power and duration of the Roman Empire, they became unchallenged masters. And isn't that the truth? So memory, when you lose the memory of your roots, right, you become what? Part of the culture of wherever you're living. So when the Romans fell out amongst themselves, this internal turmoil, what happened to Alexander's, the people who inherited Alexander's empire, the people who tried to govern Persia, the Romans, when turmoil amongst themselves, any one of them could count on the support of that part of the province where he had established authority. The Romans alone were recognized as rulers thereafter the extinction of the old line of princes. Considering these things, therefore, Lorenzo, let no one be surprised at the facility with which Alexander was able to hold Asia, and the difficulties that others have had in holding conquered territories, like Pyrrhus and many others. Pyrrhus was a Greek statement, blah, blah, blah. He was king of Mosans, and he became king of Ypres. He was one of the strongest opponents to early Rome, and he had been regarded as one of the greatest generals of antiquity. You can look him up. These are powerful men, strategic men. As this was not the cause by the greater or lesser ability of the conqueror, but depended on the dissimilarity of conditions. So it has nothing to do with the conqueror, but it's just the conditions when they conquer. If you have questions, email Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. Chapter 5. The way to govern cities or dominions that previous to being occupied lived under their own laws. Chapter 5. When those states which have been acquired are accustomed to live at liberty under their own laws, there are 3 ways of holding them. Okay, so pay attention. These are states which have been acquired. You're a baron, you're a king, you're a conqueror, you acquire these states, but they're accustomed to live at liberty under their own laws. They have their own laws. There's 3 ways to hold them, he's telling Lorenzo. The first, despoil them. What does that mean? Steal or violently remove valuable or attractive possessions. Plunder them. Holy mackerel, this is pretty cruel, isn't it? Well, is it? In those days or in these days? Do you know anybody despoiling? The second is to go and live there in person. There it is again, right? Just go there and live. And the third is to allow them to live under their own laws, take tribute of them, and then creating within the country a government composed of a few who will keep it friendly to you. There it is. First, kill them all. Second, go and live there with them. And the third, let them live under their laws and just take tribute, right? Creating a country, a government comprised of a few who will keep it friendly to you. Because this government, being created by the prince, by you, Lorenzo, knows that it cannot exist without your friendship and protection, and will do all it can to keep them. What is more, a city that's used to liberty can be more easily held by means of its citizens than in any other way, if you wish to preserve it and not to spoil it, right? There's a rule. See the little arrow? There is an example of the Spartans and the Romans. This is important, e.g., right? Example. The Spartans held Athens and Thebes by creating within them a government of a few. But nevertheless, they lost them. The Romans, in order to hold Capua, Carthage, Mencha, they ravished them, despoiled them, but they did not lose them. They wanted to hold Greece in almost the same way as the Spartans held it, leaving it free under its own laws, but they did not succeed. So they were compelled to lay waste many cities in that province in order to keep it, because in truth, there is no sure method of holding them except by despoiling them. And whoever becomes the ruler of a free city and doesn't destroy it can expect to be destroyed by it. Ladies and gentlemen, you're probably thinking, well, this is hard to believe. This is really tough nuts, right? This is tough talk. Whoever becomes a ruler of a free city and doesn't destroy it can expect to be destroyed by it. I'm not saying you should believe this. I'm saying you should think about it. You should think about it for the truth that is inherent in the history. Just examine history and look at what happens. We're going to discuss freedom in this. And remember, we're not talking about republics, which is what the United States is. Think about this. For it can always find a motive for rebellion in the name of liberty. Isn't that the truth, right? Find a motive for which are forgotten neither by the lapse of time nor by benefits received. So you can't bribe people. And whatever one does or provides, so long as the inhabitants are not separated or dispersed, they do not forget that name and those usages, but appeal to them at once in every emergency, as did Pisa, after so many years being held in the servitude of the Florentines. You can look up this example in history, but you don't have to know and understand what he just said. Pisa did this. They held this. For many years, they were in the servitude of Florentines, but at the first moment they could, they appealed. But when cities and provinces have been accustomed to live under a prince, this way, and the family of that prince is extinguished, being on the one hand used to obey, and on the other not having their old prince, they cannot unite in choosing one from among themselves, and they do not know how to live in freedom, so that they are slower to take arms. And a prince can win them over with greater facility and establish himself securely. So there's that word. It's hard to handle freedom. I think Jimmy's going to talk about this a lot in the analysis. In republics, pay attention, there is greater life, greater hatred, and more desire for vengeance. They do not and cannot cast aside the memory of their ancient liberty, so that the surest way is either to lay waste to them or reside in them. Go live with them. Chapter 6. Of new dominions which have been acquired by one's own arms and ability. So this is about new dominions that you've acquired by your arms or ability. Let no one marvel if in speaking of a new dominions, both as to a prince and state, that I bring forward very exalted instances. For men walk almost always in the paths trodden by others, proceeding in their actions by imitation. What's he saying there? Right? You walk in the paths of others, right? There's nothing new under the sun. Not being able to follow others exactly, nor attain to the excellence of those he imitates, a prudent man should always follow in the path trodden by great men and imitate those who are most excellent, so that if he does not attain to their greatness, at any rate, he will get some tinge of it. There's that man's reach must exceed his grasp ago. In other words, he's saying, follow the examples of great men. And as I'm telling you, and I tell you on this website, reading all these classics, life is short. Surround yourself with the best. Read the classics. He will do as prudent archers who, when the place they wish to hit is too far off, here's the e.g. example, knowing how far their bow will carry, they aim at a spot much higher than the one that they wish to hit. Not in order to reach this height with their arrow, but by help of this high aim to hit the spot that they wish to hit. You see this guy's amazing, isn't he? I say then that in new dominions, where there is a new prince, it's more or less easy to hold them according to the greater or lesser ability of him who acquires them. And as the fact of a private individual becoming a prince presupposes either great difficulty or great fortune, right? He either acquired it through a great ability or great fortune. If you're a private citizen who suddenly became a prince, it would appear that either of these things would in part mitigate many difficulties. Nevertheless, those who have been less beholden to good fortune have maintained themselves best. The matter is also facilitated by the prince being obliged to reside personally in his new territory, having no others. But to come to those who have become princes through their own merits and not by fortune, I regard as the greatest. Here's examples: Moses, Cyrus, Romulus, Theseus, and their like. And although one should not speak of Moses, he having merely carried out what was ordered to him by God, still Moses deserves admiration, if only for that grace which made him worthy to speak with God. But regarding Cyrus and the others who have acquired or founded kingdoms, they will all be found worthy of admiration. And if their particular actions and methods are examined, they will not appear very different from those of Moses, although he had so great a master, meaning God. And in examining their life and deeds, it will be seen that they owed nothing to fortune, but the opportunity which gave them matter to be shaped into what form they thought fit. Opportunity knocks. And without that opportunity, their powers would have been wasted. And without their powers, the opportunity would have come in vain. There's a relationship between opportunity and your talents, right? Between opportunity and your talents, right? Pardon me? Let me get this right. All right. All right. There's a relationship. So when opportunity is there and you don't have any talent, you can't seize the opportunity. We used to have a saying in my office, still do. When opportunity knocks, we don't ask, who's there? We open the door and say, come on in. Right? It was necessary that Moses should find the people of Israel slaves in Egypt and oppressed by the Egyptians, so that they were disposed to follow him in order to escape from their servitude. Watch the times he uses the word necessary, because he's painting the picture between opportunity and people's talents. It was necessary that Romulus should be unable to remain in Alba and should have been exposed at his birth in order that he might become king of Rome and founder of that nation. You can look up Romulus and Remus. It was necessary that Cyrus should find the Persians discontented with the empire of the Medes, and the Medes weak and effeminate through long peace. Theseus could not have shown his abilities if he had not found the Athenians dispersed. These opportunities, therefore, gave these men their chance, and their own great qualities enabled them to profit by them, so as to ennoble their country and augment its fortunes. That's a powerful statement, right? Those who by the exercise of abilities, such as these, become princes, obtain their dominions with difficulty, but retain them easily. And the difficulties with which they have in acquiring their dominions arise in part from the new rules and regulations that they have to introduce in order to establish their position securely. Note the arrow. It must be considered that there is nothing more difficult to carry out, nor more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous to handle than to initiate a new order of things. Ladies and gentlemen, that should get a double arrow. Can I give that a double arrow? You mind? I'm thinking of a certain situation going on right now around me. It must be considered there is nothing more difficult or doubtful of success or dangerous than initiating a new order. Wow. Pay attention. For the reformer who's trying to do this has enemies in all those who would profit by the old order, and only lukewarm defenders in all those who would profit from the new order. And this lukewarmness arising partly from fear of their adversaries who have the laws in their favor, and partly from the incredulity of mankind, look up infidelity, right? Who do not truly believe in anything new until they have actual experience of it. Thus, it arises that on every opportunity for attacking the reformer, his opponents will do so with zeal of partisans, and the others only defend him half-heartedly, so that between them he runs great danger. I hope you know what I'm talking about. It is necessary, however, in order to investigate thoroughly this question, to examine whether these innovators, reformers, are independent or whether they depend upon others. That is to say, whether in order to carry out their designs, their new order, that they have to entreat or they're able to compel. Entreat or compel. Beg or make. In the first case, they invariably succeed ill. If they have to entreat, they don't succeed, and they accomplish nothing. But when they can depend on their own strength and are able to use force, they rarely fail. Thus it comes about that all armed prophets have conquered and unarmed prophets fail. For besides that, they have already said that the character of the people varies. And it is easy to persuade the people of a thing, but it's difficult to keep them in that persuasion. I don't know why I didn't mark this with this arrow. This is an arrow. There's an arrow. And so it is necessary to order things so that when they no longer believe, that they can be made to believe by force. Moses, Cyrus, you remember Moses, right? Parting of the sea, he destroyed the Egyptians. Decius, Romulus would not have been able to keep their constitutions observed for so long as they have been able to keep, for so long as they've been, if they were disarmed, as happened in our own time by Fra Girolamo Savona, who failed entirely in his new rules when the multitude began to disbelieve in him, and he had no means of holding fast those who had believed, nor of compelling the unbelievers to believe. Therefore, such men as these have great difficulty in making their way, and all their dangers are met on the road and must be overcome by their own abilities. And when once they have overcome them, the dangers, and have begun to be held in veneration and have suppressed those who envied them, they remain powerful, secure, honored, and happy. To the high examples given, I have added a lesser one, which, however, in some measures comparable and will serve as an instance of all such cases, and that of Hiero of Syracuse. Hiero of Syracuse, who, from a private individual, became the Prince of Syracuse, who became, without other aid from fortune beyond the opportunity. For the Syracusans, being oppressed, elected him as their captain, from which post he rose by the ability to become the prince. And while still in private life, his virtues, which were such that it is written of him that he lacked nothing to reign but the kingdom. He abolished the old militia, he raised a new one, and he abandoned his old friendships and formed others. And as he had thus friends and soldiers of his own choosing, he was able on this great foundation to build securely, so that while he had great trouble in acquiring his position, he had little in maintaining it. And you can read about him if you'd like to. We're going to stop this. We're going to leave this reading for the next reading. But here's a taste. Wasn't this wonderful? Of the next chapter 7, we're going to read of new dominions acquired by the power of others or by fortune. Those who arise from private citizens to be princes merely by fortune have little trouble in rising, but a lot of difficulty in maintaining. You see? The luck ain't going to do it for you. Luck ain't going to do it for you. All right? And this is it. Such are they who are granted, blah, 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 blah. Okay. You've been reading with Jimmy. This is Jimmy. This is part 2 of 8 parts of Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. Wasn't that wonderful, ladies and gentlemen? What a genius to have documented all this, and thank God he did that, right? We have so much to learn from him. And be sure, well, Jimmy, I'm never going to be I'm not a power guy. I'm just a worker. Well, no. You don't know that. Opportunity. He's talking about opportunity, right? If opportunity arises, go within yourself and study this guy. Study what he's telling you. It applies to rules at work. Everybody has a boss, right? How do you treat your boss? The boss is like what? He's like the prince, right? He's the prince. So what do? How do you work hard, put your nose to the grindstone? Jimmy will tell you a personal story when we analyze this, of how he rose in the agency world. Jimmy was fired 3 times. Did you know that? You didn't know that. And I even read Machiavelli and I got fired. Be sure to visit and read other classics with Jimmy on my website. Remember, if you have questions, email me, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time very, very much. And don't forget, look for those opportunities. They don't come. They don't come that often, but when they come, you better pounce on them. Thanks so much. See you soon.